Hi, everybody. I hope that everyone is feeling good and energized and ready for this conversation. I know we're coming at very different times of the day. Um, just wanted to do a quick overview of last week, what we talked about. I see some familiar names and some new ones, so maybe not everyone was a part of that, but there is a video that maybe we can link in the chat to last week's video. But we really had a general conversation that was largely around questions and how people are thinking about this moment, what's taking place, the resources that are available, and the things that we really wish we had. So we spent a lot of time talking about what's missing and what we need to be able to take this conversation forward, and also to move from conversation to action. And we talked quite a bit about the pitfalls and how easy it is to feel kind of stuck, like you don't know what to do, what's the right way to act, what if you make a mistake, especially if you are an ally, if you're a white person or a non-Black person of color. How do you support the community? How do you not take up a lot of space? Which is why we decided on this session to be next, because we thought if people feel stuck, we need to get unstuck before we can get into other things. So that link is in the chat for you to check out a little bit later. And it's still open for discussion if you want to bring it up with an email to Chloe or in future sessions. Those topics are still very live, so don't feel like you missed out, and that's it. For today, we're talking about inappropriate action and appropriate action. And when I was going over my notes last night, I thought maybe we should focus more on what's appropriate and some of the things that have happened, instead of putting too much emphasis on the not, and having that sort of negative focus. But from last week, some of the things that we did talk about not doing is trying to capitalize on this moment. So you'll see a lot of people and a lot of brands trying to figure out how to make money out of what's happening, out of Black Lives Matter, out of the protests and anti-racist work. People are trying to sell their stuff. They're trying to get you to go to their website, give them clicks, check out their content. And sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's really useful content, but do we really need people leading this conversation who are focused on their bank accounts right now? Is that really what anyone who's trying to be helpful is focused on? Probably not. So just making sure that what you're doing isn't focused on the almighty dollar. Another one was playing victim, which happens quite a lot. And it's not always intentional. Sometimes people think that they're making a connection, a personal connection to something, but really what you're doing is making yourself the center of the situation. A lot of times this happens when something quite difficult has taken place and you're not sure how to respond. So you'll see a lot of people as well on social media saying, oh, I'm just so heartbroken, I'm so confused, I'm sad, I don't know what to do. As a white person, I feel so guilty. And these are feelings that we can expect to come up, but they're not really for us to deal with right now. Like, your feelings are kind of for you to deal with within your own community, maybe with your therapist, maybe just talking to your friend, but not bringing that to people who are in the midst of fighting to survive, essentially. So just some of the key things to avoid, but more generally around what to do. I think one of the reasons we really get stuck is because we're not focused enough on our goal. So we realize that there are protests going on. We're talking about Black Lives Matter using the hashtag. We're talking about police brutality, and more specifically, the murder of Black people by police. But that's sort of the catalyst. That's the catalyst, but what are we really trying to get at the end of the day? And one of the things that's really important to do when you're thinking about what you do next or what you do first is, what's your purpose? And I think one of the reasons that we often choose the wrong thing or fall into these pitfalls is that we're not focused on the purpose. So I just took a couple of minutes and scribbled out a little mind map. It doesn't go into too much depth, but I think it'll help us to visualize and talk through some of this. So if you want to use the chat and tell me what you think the greater vision is of all of this. So we're talking about, like I said, Black Lives Matter, the protests that are taking place now, the fight for police to, well, for the world to end police brutality, to get rid of institutionalized racism within policing, and protecting Black life. What is our greater vision? And once we have some ideas of vision, we can move on to what do we do next? How do we achieve that vision? Oh, we also have a link to the Google Doc where people have shared some resources that have been helpful at this time or that we think will be helpful. It's an open doc, so you can add your favorite resources there as well. So books, podcasts, anything that relates to this moment or activism or how to sort through how you're feeling, how to take action. Lots of great ideas in that Google Doc. Okay, maybe folks are still thinking about their vision. Oh, we got one from Bryan. Change the institutional and systematic gaps that create inequality between persons of color. Oh, that's interesting. Between persons of color. Cool. Okay, I'll keep my eye on that to see if more people pop their thoughts in, but I'll show you my, I cannot draw. Even circles I struggle, so it's kind of a mess. Hopefully this is not, is this backwards or can you actually see it? So that's my middle right here. This is what I think the vision is. Black liberation. And I just thought of two things that I think can lead us to Black liberation. So those are like the next level on my mind map. Black liberation being the vision. And these two things, I keep asking the question how when I move out from this vision. So how do we get Black liberation? And here I have end wealth inequality. And over here I have end racism. So I'm going to focus on the end racism bit first. We want to get to Black liberation. How do we do that? By ending racism. Well, how do we end racism? By stopping police murders. How do we stop police murders? By defunding or abolishing police. That's a whole other conversation that I think we need to have at another time. But this is sort of where I ended my how. Defund or abolish police. Great. But by what action are we going to do this? And I just scribbled down a couple. Protest, write a letter to the mayor, a petition, a policy brief, donate to organizations. And there's a whole conversation to have about where to donate money. But it's all linked to this. So these are kind of smaller steps. They get smaller and smaller and smaller, but build us toward Black liberation. On the other side, we've got end wealth inequality, but how? Redistribution. How do we redistribute wealth? Increasing wages, so minimum wage, or moving from minimum wage to a living wage. And then we have progressive tax. So tax the rich. Enough with these regressive taxes that actually disadvantage people who are experiencing poverty or who receive low incomes. So this is like a really simple exercise that you could go through, and you might have something different in the middle. That's fine. This is what I came up with. And just keep asking yourself how. And then when you get to the end of the how, when you can't really how anymore, ask yourself, by what action can I make this possible? Do we have more? Yes. So Guy says the greater vision could be to see everyone as equal and celebrate difference and diversity. I like that one. I like that one. I think like, because it focuses on equality as well as acknowledging differences, and moves us into not just seeing that we have cultural or political or social differences, but celebrating them. Do we have any more coming? All right, so I have a few actions that I came across on social media that I want to share with you. And I'm very curious about your thoughts on which of these actions you will think are appropriate and which ones are not appropriate. So I'm going to show you, and we have a poll, and those poll questions will pop up, and it's just asking you, is this appropriate? Is it inappropriate? Or are you not sure? And then we'll discuss as many of them as we can within this time frame. So I'm going to share my screen. You won't be able to see me anymore. So this one is a sort of infographic about, and I think there were 4 pieces to this, how to protest safely during COVID-19. This is a really difficult time to protest because it requires crowds generally and being really close together. And one of the things that we're supposed to be doing is staying 6 feet apart. And even when that's not possible, there are other things that we can do to reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. So I think this one is pretty straightforward. This one is very interesting. So this is an Instagram post from a Black man who is introducing his wife, who he feels is being targeted by criticism of white people. And he starts off by saying people of color, so we know exactly who he's talking to. Let me introduce you to my white wife. She's my best friend, my world, the greatest blessing God has ever given me. She feels your pain. She worries for her husband when he leaves the house. And she too is deeply saddened by some of our nation's most recent events, the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. Please know that when you make blanket statements or generalizations about how all white people are racist, you're talking about my wife. In fact, you're talking about some of my closest friends and the best people I know. That I can't tolerate. I'm okay with people making judgments about me because of my skin color. To be honest, I couldn't care less what people think of me. However, when you make statements about people I care about, it ticks me off. Get off Facebook and know that not everyone has to express themselves the same way you do. Very interested in what you think about this. 20% of people say that this is appropriate, and 60% say it's not appropriate. And then another 20% say they're not sure. Someone who thinks it's not appropriate. Anybody want to speak to their position?
Hello, everyone. So I would like to share that he made a point from his view, because of the relationship he has with the people in his life and his wife and all of that. But at the same time, he also invalidated the feelings of other people. So in talking about how you feel and how you feel about your loved ones, you also need to think about how vulnerable other people are. So he started off by saying, okay, my wife is this, and I was flowing. But when he got to the point of saying people should get off Facebook, they cannot just, like, that's taking off the freedom of expression from people. So I feel like there is a more emphatic way he could have expressed that. And it doesn't have to result in invalidating the opinions of others, because just the same way he feels about his wife, other people feel about their black women who are about their wives who are black women, or husbands who are also black men. So there needs to be a balance in sharing our thoughts, especially across social media, where a lot of people have access to the information we share because we are influencing them.
Thank you for sharing that, because you really can very easily get caught up in your own perspective, and it takes intention, like intentional practice, to think outside of your own experience.
I didn't think it was appropriate because it's taking the discussion away from Black people towards white people. And I think particularly at the moment when everything is so raw, is that the focus should be on Black people. And then when he discusses the fact that she knows how you feel and she feels your pain, I don't believe that white people can understand the pain that is felt, because this is so ingrained into kind of mass consciousness and has so much history and context behind it. So I think it's very dangerous to try and relate how white people are feeling compared to how Black people are feeling, and vice versa.
Yeah, so creating false equivalencies. And he did talk about her feeling fearful when he leaves the house and that kind of thing. And that's an experience of close proximity, but not of the actual experience. So there's a distinct difference there, like you pointed out. Nicholas?
Yeah, I guess I lowered my hand because I heard my thoughts more or less being expressed by the others. But I guess just to tack on to what others have said already, it kind of it kind of felt like it was a kind of felt like he was steering towards being, I guess, a white apologist, for lack of better words. Um, and so it more just it was a bit insensitive, um, given the situation. Um, and so he basically just more or less um, made his wife the subject as opposed to the movement and what is really going on, in tandem with what we really are, I guess, fighting for.
Thank you, Nicholas. I'm glad that you still decided to make your point, because I think there were some distinctions in it. And it's interesting you use the term white apologist. And I think that I was kind of thinking in this direction too.
Quick point though, Alicia.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you, but I don't know if you saw, like, for instance, Terry Cruz's tweet or his remark. In it had the same sentiment. And
Do you
so,
want to tell us about what he said?
I don't even want to paraphrase. Let me, you know what? Continue speaking. I'll find the tweet.
Okay,
and then
sure. But the thing that stuck out to me about this guy's Instagram post is that he was the post is defensive. It's defensive, and it's not showing any thought about what we're experiencing in this moment. And it takes very personally something that is a public and general issue. And when we have conversations like this, we speak in very general terms. And I think that's something that we can talk about at another time too, like how we're making generalizations, because a lot of times we say things like about men are trash, right? Like that's such a common statement that Facebook has censored it. If you say it, your comment will get deleted. And when we're talking about racism, we talk a lot about white people this, white people that. And it's not because we're attacking all white people. It's because what we're talking about is a function of whiteness. It's inherent in whiteness and has to be addressed and has to be dealt with on an individual basis by white people themselves. So while all white people aren't out here running around using the N-word, some people are. And the people who aren't doing it because they have done some work for themselves to realize that there's something wrong with that. Nicholas, when you find it and you're ready to talk about it, just raise your hand, and then
well, I
I'll
found
come
it.
back. Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. So he says on June the 7th at 6:25 p.m., defeating white supremacy without white people creates black supremacy. Equality is the truth. Like it or not, we are all in this together. Um, I don't know what part we're going to dissect first, whether it's the piece on black supremacy, and kind of unraveling how that would more or less be impossible at this stage because of institutional racism. And so in order to, I guess what the word itself, so supremacy, implies is that you you essentially have this grandiose amount of power that is extremely difficult to, I guess, remove. And so in this instance, one of the reasons why this tweet in particular invalidates our experience and is just completely wrong is because uh, white people have, I guess, systematically been within the cornerstones of power for centuries, um, specifically within the confines of, I guess, like brute force from like the police, for instance, and in other contexts with regards to the government. And in another context, another pillar of capitalism. So it really is kind of hard to, especially being a minority within the context of the US, for instance, it really is hard to declare that there will ever be black supremacy, um, given the fact that about like 90% of these spaces, 90% or more are just like dominated by white people, for instance. And so with, I guess, black people being a minority, it would imply that I guess all white people within those spaces would have to die technically in order for us to gain that kind of traction and power, at least statistically, um, for that statement to be true. Uh, I guess the equality is truth piece, that would have been true if we were all starting on the same playing field, and clearly we're not. I guess a correction to that piece of the statement is equity is a truth. And if we start from a place of equity, empathy, and understanding, then we can work our way up to equality. But you know, we're not exactly there yet. But yeah, I don't know if you had thoughts. What I said, I mentioned his tweet to say that it kind of had the same sentiment as that entire Instagram post.
Yeah, yeah, I think you summed it up really well. So I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it is a clear misunderstanding of systems, right? It's a misunderstanding of how systems work, how racism works, how supremacy, white supremacy works. And it's also quite lazy, especially for someone with the kind of platform that this person has. It's reckless to make statements like this without talking to people who are experts in this field, people who are doing this work every day, because you're reaching so many people with misinformation and possibly scaring people out of acting. So anyone who's interested in responses to that, definitely check out that person's page, because there are a lot of responses to it. Ben, your hand is raised. Did you want to say something else?
Quick thing. The person that made the post, that person is a person of color, yes?
It's a Black person, yeah.
Right. So in the options, I actually was looking for I was actually looking for the option of kind of problematic, need help. Because one, I see his perspective, but he said something that was kind of concerning to me. He said he doesn't care about himself because he faces this every day. And I think, but he does care about the people around him. And that to me spoke to something a lot more, something bigger. And it kind of alluded to something else that I wanted to talk about, which is internalized racism. So, I mean, we don't know what's going on with him and, his dynamic, but to me, if you're looking at something that's systemic and affecting you every day, and then you're saying, well, I don't care about my own well-being or how I am moving through the world, but I do care about these other people, that's a problem. And not only that, I also wanted to talk about, well, not talk about, but just kind of flag proximity to whiteness. Because because it is a thing. So we don't know what his experience is. We don't know what the experience of Americans are. And it's something that I really want to stay, like for me, being a Black Trinidadian boy from the Caribbean, I really want to stay away from, because my experience is not the experience of a Black American. I think the systemic problems there and the institutional problems there are a lot more perverse and deep than what I would ever have to face. But I'm not saying I don't face it in Trinidad, I do. But I think, other than the statement or the post being problematic, the fact that he said that, he's not really looking at himself, but looking at someone else that's white that actually has to face what he might have to face or had to face, that to me, it says a lot about the individual and what they're going through and just how they're viewing the world, because this is something that's been going on for so long. I think the people's perception of themselves and their world and how they move through the world has changed. And this is why this conversation is so important, because you have people that are of color that are now moving through the world aiming for whiteness, or not even, and if you're not aiming for whiteness, you're actually telling yourself it's okay to not be okay, and they should be okay. Like, I don't know, that statement really stood out. I was like, oh, he has like something's going on. So yeah, that's just it. I think the American system and what's happening there is something that really needs attention. But what I also wanted to ask is, can we, instead of looking at this like Black Lives Matter and what we could do on the whole, can we look at it as what's going on in particular regions or like a particular diaspora? Because I don't think the experience of a Black American is the experience of a Black Caribbean person or a Black British person. I don't think the systems that are operating are the same. I don't think the playing field is the same. So I don't know, it's something I was thinking about while all of this was going on. Maybe we should put some context around, what are we looking at when we say Black Lives Matter and addressing the problem?
Yeah, thank you. Lots of great points there. And I'm glad that you brought up the internalization of racism. And also, I think you were sort of pointing to almost like a guilt around being in a relationship with a white person and feeling the need to defend them because you've already bought into whiteness. Like you said, you have proximity to whiteness, and it's almost like you're feeling the white guilt by association. So that was really, really interesting. And Nicholas was feeling you on the internalized racism. You got some snaps in the chat. And then you talked about contextualizing, understanding that Black Lives Matter is, it's a hashtag, we all understand it, we're using it all around the world, but racism, white supremacy, and a lot of these systems that we need to dismantle are showing up differently in different parts of the world and in different regions, as you pointed out. And so we have a discussion coming up that is just that is contextualizing and talking to people from different regions about how these systems present themselves, how people are responding to them, and how we can be in solidarity with people in different regions who are having a different version of the same struggle. So maybe someone from QCT can drop the link to that specific discussion in the chat, but it was in the email that was sent last week, and I'm sure that there'll be a reminder email coming up. I'm saying I'm sure, like I'm just giving people work to do, it's fine. But I'm pretty sure that there will be an email with information about the upcoming sessions. I'm going to share my screen again to show another example that I'm very curious about what you're going to think about this. So this is a post from, I'm not really sure who this is, if this is like a graphic design company or what, but they're trying to be helpful. The tweet is from someone who's critiquing the resource, if we could call it a resource. It's a set of email templates that you can use to communicate as a white person with your Black friends. So the words that you need to use in an email to your Black friend, and you can't see it here, so I'll read to you one of these templates. Hey, insert name. I'll never pretend to know how you feel right now, which makes my role in this movement all the more necessary. I'm committed to doing the work both personally and in my community to make this world a safe place for you and every Black person in the world. I've donated, emailed, posted, insert action done. And I tell you this not for brownie points, but so you know my words are backed by action. I see you, I hear you, I support you. I stand with Black lives because they matter. Please feel no obligation to respond unless to share a Black-owned business I can support. Love you, and please take care of yourself while we dismantle white supremacy together. And I just want to point out that white has a capital W in this email template. So that's option number one. Option number two, hey, insert name. I know it's been a while since we've spoken, but you've been on my mind because it hurts to realize that my white skin automatically gives me a universal advantage in this world. I message you not to share this overdue revelation, but to let you know I'm done feeling guilty for having white skin, and now I'm using my privilege to amplify the cries of the Black community. I spoke with my white, insert parents, siblings, boss, coworkers, etc., and every circle of friends I'm in to make sure that we're each doing our parts. I've also donated to insert organization. And I tell you this not for brownie points, but so you know my words are backed by actions. I see you, I hear you, I support you. I stand with Black lives because they matter. Please feel no obligation to respond. Just know my allyship is a verb. So that's two of, I think, 4 email templates. And again, love to know what you think. All right, so we have 80% saying no, inappropriate. Oh, it's changing, woo. All right, 67% say no, it's inappropriate. 17% say yes, it is appropriate. And 29% say I'm not sure. Who wants to talk about their feelings about this?
I guess just 2 things quickly. The first is I'm not exactly sure about these quick and easy templates. They they just seem too easy. I don't know. It just feels like it almost diminishes the work that they're already doing. And I guess secondly, we should be having uncomfortable conversations. The only reason why we even in this mess is because we managed to just suppress things and more or less hold seminars on how to, I guess, make people feel comfortable, whether Black or white, or any other race for that matter. It's important to be uncomfortable, to allow that space to I guess be alive so that it can more or less become comfortable over time. but we have to get over the hard parts, and providing a template, using a quick and easy template to appease your sins isn't productive. At least I don't find.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, a template is very rarely the way to go, I think, especially when it's so precise, it's so exact, and the language is kind of weird, I find. A lot of people who commented on it on social media were saying that the language is just so stilted or so business-like for a personal email.
It's literally a corporate statement. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's not a very personal statement, but also people were saying, who has Black friends and doesn't know how to send them a text message? Actually, the templates they were for text messages, not emails. They read like emails, but they were recommended as a text message. So, if you know people who are Black, who you haven't spoken to in a long time, or you don't know how to address, maybe don't talk to them about this. Don't just pop up to have this conversation. So Monica is saying the templates felt emotionless. Emily says, yes, it is diplomatic. And Sarah says, feels as if Black people were not consulted about this template. Yeah, you really have to ask, who did this? Who is responsible for this template? Who thought this was a good idea? All right, I have another to share with you. This one is a well-known person. We might not know him for his work, but this is one of those beautiful circumstances where we know his wife. He is the husband of. And he is a co-founder of a particular social media platform, founded 15 years ago. And he says that it was to help people find community and a sense of belonging. And it's long overdue. And this is a decision that he's making for himself, for his family, and for his country. And that decision is to resign as a member of the board of this organization. And he's urged the board to fill his seat with a Black candidate. And he's going to use his stock in this company to serve the Black community, and starting with a pledge of $1 million to Colin Kaepernick's organization, Your Rights Camp. And he references, he said he's talking about this as the father of a Black child, because he's not a Black person. Start thinking about what you think. The poll is coming. So we have 40% saying yes, it's appropriate. 20% saying no, it's not appropriate. And 40% are unsure. So Ben, are you ready to jump in?
Hey, I actually have a question for the last post, the last one that you read, because I actually got that from a very good friend of mine's. It was the weirdest thing, I have to admit. The post itself was very weird because he sent it to me, and then I had to
Ben, are you talking about the email thing?
Yes, the email.
Okay.
I actually did get it from a very good friend of mine.
Oh my God. Okay.
And I wanted to find out, because in having a conversation with him, he is white, and in having a conversation with him, I had to go back and ask him, why did you send that to me? Like, what is this about? And he said, well, if anything had happened in the past, so I actually wanted to hear from people who aren't of color, how they felt about it, because like in having a conversation, I realized that the whole Black Matters movement, everything that's going on, we have a very good relationship. And then all of a sudden there was this weird tension of, I don't know how to talk to my friend who is Black. And I had to kind of be like, okay, you need to you need to stop this. Like, our friendship hasn't changed. I don't know, like, if I ever had a problem, I think I would have addressed it with you. So I'm kind of intrigued to find out if people who aren't of color, how they felt about the email, because I don't know. I mean, I asked them, why did you send this to me? We are good. We speak all the time. I don't have an issue. I don't think you're a person who, would need this. So I'd actually like to find out from people who aren't of color, like, did you think it was okay? Would you have sent it to a friend, and why is it difficult to like bridge that gap? Because I don't know, it was so interesting when my friend sent it to me. So I'm so sorry, but I actually just wanted to find out from people who are not of color how they felt about that message.
I was just going to say that I felt the idea, I think it was the point that Alicia made earlier, like the idea of needing a template to talk to a Black friend about something which I can educate myself on, like personally, and like it's all too clear, the trauma that kind of the oppression of Black people has created over hundreds of years. And I still felt that even the phrase, this isn't for brownie points, but I'm still going to tell you just about my experience and what I'm doing, felt like a non-productive centering of me as the white person versus the needs of my friend. And I'd hope I wouldn't need a template, just to ask them how I could best support them at that time. So I liked the chat actually between kind of Emily and Nicholas, like Emily saying it was a really diplomatic way. And I can see how for some people who maybe are approaching this and thinking this is overwhelming and I really don't want to put my foot in it, the idea of having a hand might be helpful. But to Nicholas's point, diplomacy is sometimes counterproductive in that you, like, if you have an issue of talking to a friend just because they're Black and Black people as a community are going through something that's as important as this is now, you should be able to have that conversation and be able to trust your relationship as friends, that you can approach that in a way that's like meaningful without needing someone to write a text out for you, was my reaction.
Yeah, I had exactly the same reaction to it. And I think the other thing that I felt was that the way that it was scripted to sound personal, so if I see you, I hear you, made it even less personal, because it was just, you're talking about a blanket template that could go out to however many people. And for me, and it's not necessarily about the issue, but it's just the idea of having some kind of personal words put in my mouth, if you like, to send out to people just felt inherently wrong and uncomfortable. And I completely echo everything that Reed just said too.
Thank you for sharing. Hopefully that gives you some idea of what's going on, Ben. So I want to move back to that last display of this person who's stepping down. So as a reminder, we had 40% saying yes, it's appropriate, 20% saying it's not appropriate, and 40% saying not sure. Nicholas, do you still want to talk about this?
Okay, I guess for this one, I viewed it as appropriate on the flip side. And I'm not sure if it's coming from a place of bias. Just as, I guess, a disclaimer, I've had interactions with Alexis in the past when I was raising money for my startup, and his replacement as well, Michael, who happens to be Black. And so the reason why I guess I would deem this as appropriate is, I guess, linking back to my earlier comment about supremacy and the ways in which power is, I guess, systematically oppressing our race. And so I'd laid out a few pillars, the power coming in the form of government, another coming in the form of, I guess, capitalism and business, and the third coming in the form of brute force. And so the capitalism and business piece or / economic piece is what this is more or less addressing. And I guess for even more of a background, capitalism, the way how it works, the only reason why it works right now is because it was more or less built on the backs of free labor, and that free labor happened to come from a particular set of people who happen to be Black. And so one way of at least starting the movement and the conversation around equity, especially on the economic front, is to sometimes step aside. You have to recognize that Reddit itself is worth $3 billion US. $3 billion US is a lot, firstly. And so when you have, when that company itself is dominated by people of, I guess, a similar race with not much diversity, it more or less builds on the problem itself. And even though I don't think that him stepping down and replacing himself with Michael will solve this problem, it is for sure a very, very good indicator and a very good step. Yeah. Because of course, you know, Michael will for sure influence the rest of the company culture moving forward. And so that is for sure extremely important, especially for a $3 billion US company.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Nicholas. Also, something to think about is when people step down, particularly with the intention of creating space for Black people or another identity, there's the assumption that the space is actually going to be filled by someone who holds that identity. But there's really no way to hold the company or the board to that. You know, you can make that recommendation, but how do you know that it's going to happen? And what if it opens the space for someone who is not thinking the way you're thinking, and you end up with things being a bit worse because of that? Are there systems in place to ensure that when you leave, they're going to follow your recommendation? Or, you know, sometimes does it make more sense to stay as someone who is aware of the issues and who does care and who does want to make a difference? Is it better for you to be in that position for a little bit longer to be able to affect change from that seat? It's another thing to think about that complicates it, I think. And we got a comment from Marie saying on that post, I was unsure, as I agree with Sarah that it's great he's made a statement and opened his purse to share his wealth where it's needed. But you could argue that there's power from staying in the space and creating the solution yourself. Did he need to step down to encourage more Black people, or could he have worked internally to increase available spaces for Black people at the top? Yeah. How do we balance that? Because on one side you have a non-Black person sitting in that seat saying, oh, I think I can make it better myself. And then on the other hand, you have, I'm going to make space for someone who actually holds this identity to do this work. And it's just, how do you know which way to go? So it's really not as black and white as it might seem. I am going to share one more because we are over time on this section, which is fine. We'll make it up. But I'm just going to share one more with you. These are disparate posts. So on the left side, we have a photo of this police officer. I don't remember what city this is, but they had an 8 o'clock curfew and he decided to sort of negotiate with protesters. And it was a very calm conversation where he went out there and he said, look, the curfew is at 8 o'clock. So at 8 o'clock, we really need you to clear out and go home. And if we can get some agreement from you that you will clear out at 8 o'clock, we'll come out here at 7:55 and take a knee with you. And the folks there said, okay, cool. All right, that's fine. I mean, they did question a little bit and say, hey, why do we have a curfew? These other cities don't have curfews and we do. And the police officer said, you know, I can't do anything. Essentially, he said, you know, it's not in his power to do something about the curfew. But what he can do is ensure that he and his guys come out at 5 minutes to curfew and take the knee. I didn't see any footage or any coverage of them actually kneeling together. But I think it was the next day, yes, it was the next day, that there was an elderly man on the sidewalk and there were about 15 police officers walking in the opposite direction. And this guy, you can't really tell in the video what he was doing or what he was saying, but one of the officers basically knocked him down and he was on the ground and there was blood like coming from his head. And all of the officers just kind of walked by, except one. One started to stop to check on him, and he was quickly checked by another officer who was just like, nah, we keep it moving. The same guy who initiated the knee thing. So again, I want to know what you think about this. And the appropriateness around the knee, you know, the negotiation of the curfew and taking the knee. So 75% say no, it's inappropriate. 25% are not sure. No one has said yes, this is appropriate. Anyone want to talk about their, Sarah, do you want to talk about this?
I personally think it's pretty inappropriate. Just because, one, the fact that you're trying to negotiate with them just about a curfew time and you're trying to give them what they want for something they really stand for, just like, okay, we'll take the knee with you so you can go home. But do you actually know what the knee signifies? Like, do you know how significant it is about what your police department or police colleagues did to George Floyd? So I think as well, it's a gesture, but I don't think it's genuine, because do they really seriously know the impact of taking the knee? And I think they just said it just to be like, okay, we need you guys out, you know, because otherwise it's going to look bad on our part that our police department couldn't control a crowd of people.
My thoughts are similar to Sarah's. What is the meaning of the kneeling? I mean, I honestly don't understand it. I don't know what it signifies. And I think it was interesting that there were protesters that had this very brief conversation with the officer and none of them asked, okay, you're gonna kneel with us, but what does that mean? Or what does it mean to you to kneel with us? And I also question the negotiation that, you know, you leave at this particular time. You end your demonstration for this act of symbolism, basically. So from what we've seen, what can you pinpoint that inappropriate actions have in common, or that appropriate actions have in common?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, sorry, I joined in a little bit late. Was out there running about with trying to get school kids some oranges and stuff. Yeah, so I've been listening, I think, for about 20 minutes. And so there's quite a few things rushing through my head, and I'm trying to kind of make sense of my thoughts here. But I think I think earlier on, either Ben or someone was mentioning about the need to sometimes contextualize things, because obviously in this instance you have police officers who are obviously employed by the state and therefore have some kind of responsibility in fulfilling their duties. Saying that, also there is obviously this inherent understanding that the police are there to protect and serve not just some but all of, you know, everyone. And then obviously there's the bureaucratic side of things where at least in our context here in South Africa, that when you are protesting, you need to kind of apply for a permit, so that you kind of have people who are going to be there in case things go haywire, and in our instance that tends to happen quite quickly. So I think there are those kind of layers to that one kind of interaction that we're seeing there, with police kind of saying, guys, we unfortunately have a job to do here. We don't want to get things ugly where we have to come out with all our riot gears and are forced to then engage with you in a very kind of brutal way. But as a middle ground, can we kind of join your protest? But then that brings up for me a whole number of questions, and I noted them down because for me, the whole, even the previous kind of slides that you showed us, for me, there's two things that come to mind. Is that racism, I think, is almost like a two-part conversation. And the first part, for me at least, is a conversation amongst Black people or people who identify as Black. And there's a need for some kind of consciousness about what that means. What does, when we talk about systemic racism, what does that mean to us as Black people? How do we identify that? How do we define that? And then obviously there's the second part of that conversation, which now includes our white, compatriots, if I can use that word. And so there's these kind of systems of that need to engage in our conversation. And part of I think that email or that text kind of template that you were showing was kind of that kind of stood out for me in that regard. So again, the way we engage with kind of Black police officers generically. Yes, there are these systems of power even within the police when we look at the distribution of resources, for instance, where you have police officers being more available in white spaces rather than Black spaces, and where Black spaces are where crime is happening more than it is in white spaces. So there's all of these different conversations. I feel that we need to kind of to get to the core of this, and how you then kind of eat at this elephant that is systemic racism a piece at a time. So there's all of these things, but when it comes to this particular question for me is that there are layers to that picture that derive kind of from the state having to do what they need to do. I don't know whether you have to apply in America for a permit to protest and all of that stuff. So there's a bit of things that are going on in that picture for me that we need to understand in the context of America. But if we were talking about the South African context, it would be kind of like, okay, guys, it's over now, you kind of need to go. And if we then felt like, oh, actually, we don't feel like you guys are on our side. And we've had those types of protests here where we're like, okay, we're gonna take on the police. Obviously, the question then becomes, is what are we trying to achieve? And how do we go about gaining allies, whether it's from people within state departments, such as the police, such as politicians and all of those, because the fight, unfortunately, is not one that we can strictly win on the street. We have to, there are some spaces where we're gonna have to be diplomatic about it and be strategic about how we go about that fight. But obviously, like I said, there's a need for me, I think, to contextualize that picture. But like I said, that's just my thoughts. I think I'll kind of try and put them together in a different, when we have another conversation about race again.
Awesome. So on the question of what inappropriate actions have in common, Sarah, I think, gets right at it and says, I think not actually understanding the issues impacting the community you're trying to reach. And that's a definite disconnect, not understanding the issues. And if you don't really grasp the issues, it's really hard to respond, especially if you're responding to a particular incident. It's not always the incident that needs the response, but what caused the incident, which is why we have to look to root causes and look at our vision. What is the vision? Going back to the vision and figuring out how we get to that vision and establishing objectives for our actions. Appropriate actions, what the appropriate actions have in common is talking to people. This is from Sarah, talking to the people, seeing what they need and how best to support them, not from your own understanding as someone who is not Black. So having a connection to the community and listening and finding out what the needs are of community members. Sarah also says, critique actions. Are there any Black people endorsing or supporting the actions of this template? Have they made an effort to understand the issues in the community? If they are approached and told that they get it wrong, are they willing to revise to what the people need to continue? So I think this is speaking to how we critique actions, because this is really important as well. It's one thing to see people acting and to recognize what is appropriate or what we think is inappropriate, but how do we address it when someone's gone about it the wrong way, or they've taken an action that we think could actually cause more harm? And I've seen lots of calling out on social media, which is sometimes necessary. Sometimes the correction has to be just as loud as the mistake. But there are times when it is really beneficial to just talk to the person one-on-one about what's going on. Because if you've made a mistake and you were really genuinely trying to help, and you have hundreds of messages or retweets or shares with people saying how foolish your action was, it's really hard to move on from that. But if there's someone in your community or someone close to you who's a part of the community that you're trying to help, who can speak to you one-on-one and say, hey, I saw you did this thing. I really don't know why you did it, but here are the implications of what you just did, and you need to fix it. Sometimes people just need that calling in. And I really think that right now, people in the Black community don't necessarily have the time or the energy to do that calling in or to exercise that kind of patience. So it really falls on people who aren't Black, who have that understanding, or who hear from Black people their frustrations and can take on that role of interceding and saying, hey, here's the issue. Let's talk about this, and let's talk about how you can do a better job of it. And that's one way to be an ally that doesn't require being in the forefront, just actually talking to people about their actions and figuring out how to move forward in a way that is more productive and more effective and impactful and doesn't cause harm. So I think one thing that we can think about is developing a set of questions that we can ask that help us to figure out if our actions are helpful or not. So we can start with, what is the action? Who is going to see it? This thing that we plan to do, who's going to see it? Who is going to benefit from it? And if they benefit, how? And who is going to be moved by it? Who's going to see this action and actually be inspired to think differently about the way they live their lives or the way they behave? So that's kind of the who. And then asking yourself why you want to do a particular thing. Because sometimes the reason you want to do something is because you feel useless, or because you think that it's an opportunity to raise your profile. And just being really honest about your answer, why you're taking an action, can help you to figure out whether or not it's the right way to go. Another question to ask yourself is where this action is taking place. And it could be as simple as whether it's in public or private. So a private action could be what I was just talking about, speaking to somebody one-on-one and explaining to them why their idea is just not gonna work. It's like something that you can do offside. And then a public action is like stepping down from your position and making space for someone on the board. Or in the city of DC, the mayor actually painted the street, the huge in yellow Black Lives Matter across the street that leads to some big building, the White House or something. I forget where. And it is the White House. And it's a very public thing to do. And it's actually a controversial thing to do, even in the space of people who are supporters of Black Lives Matter or involved in the movement, because the question becomes, okay, is this performative? Are you just doing this to appease people? Or are you doing this recognizing that everyone who takes this road that's necessary to get to the White House is going to see this, and that there are going to be aerial shots of this, and maybe this will inspire more people? Like, what is the reason that the mayor did that? And I don't know if there's been any commentary from the mayor at all on that, but if there is, it would be interesting to see what she says the reason for that action was. But why if you're doing something in the public, why? I think when it's public, there's even more reason to question what you're doing. And Also pop into the chat if you think that something like this is useful. If you had some set of guidelines, some set of questions that you could ask yourself before you take an action. Do you think that that would be useful, and would that be useful to people that you know who want to be helpful? Do you think that it would be used? Because I think it's something that we can work on and make available if that's helpful. We are pretty much out of time, y'all. I don't know how we whipped through. Thank you so much for joining and for participating in the conversation, because it really only gets its richness from your perspectives and your personal experiences and what you're going through and what you bring to the table. There's so much to discuss. There are so many different ways to go about things, and there's a lot that we can learn from each other. So I'm really looking forward to the upcoming sessions and seeing you and hearing from you in those. And thank you to Chloe for all of her amazing organizing work to make sure that these sessions happen. And hopefully we'll see you next Friday.